We now come to a section of the book of Acts that can be summarized as the story of Cornelius. It begins in Acts chapter 9, verse 32, and goes all the way through chapter 11, verse 18. This will include, for example, the ministry of Peter in the remainder of chapter 9, which is a prelude to the events of chapter 10, and chapter 11 is the postscript to the events of chapter 10, so they naturally move from one area to the other. So now with this section, the story of Paul is interrupted by the account of Peter's witness to Cornelius. The account is essential because Paul was clearly commissioned in chapter 9, verse 15, to be the apostle to the Gentiles. But before he actually could go out to them, Peter must first open the door of the kingdom to the Gentiles, just as it was in the cases of the Jews in chapter 2 and the Samaritans in chapter 8. Peter had to use the keys of the kingdom given to him by the Lord. In chapter 10, the account of the conversion of Cornelius and how the first Gentiles were brought into the body of the Messiah will be given. Once Peter used his keys to open the door, Paul was free to begin his ministry from chapter 13 onward. Therefore, in the remainder of chapter 9, there is an account of the circumstances that eventually led Peter to the home of Cornelius, the Gentile. But not just the Gentile, but an uncircumcised Gentile. Now, Gentiles that previously converted to Judaism before Acts 2 were included among those who became believers in Acts 2, but this is something different. These are Gentiles who never converted to Judaism, and these are Gentiles who are still in a state of uncircumcision, and that's going to be the key turnover. So begin with the prelude, the witness of Peter in Acts chapter 9, verse 32 through verse 43, and we begin with the ministry at Lydda. Acts chapter 9, verses 32 through 35. In the Hebrew Bible, it was given the name of Lod, but now it goes by the Hellenistic name of Lydda. So verses 32 through 35 describe Peter's ministry in Lydda, located in the Shephelah region of the land of Israel. And so verse 32 reads, as Peter went through all parts, he finally arrives at Lydda. This shows that the apostles had begun to work in places outside of Jerusalem. Before this point in the book of Acts, only Peter and John had made an excursion into Samaria, while all the other apostles stayed in Jerusalem, but now they began to go further. Peter basically followed Philip, perhaps in order to confirm Philip's ministry in Judea by apostolic authority, just as he had earlier authenticated Philip's ministry in Samaria. In the course of his travels in Judea, he came to the believers who were living in Lydda. In the Hebrew Scriptures, the New Testament city of Lydda was called Lod. Later, the city was renamed Diospolis. Today, the main Israeli airport can be found there, and therefore will be sometimes referred to as the Lod Airport in Hebrew. By the time Peter arrived, there were saints that dwelt at Lydda, showing that the city already had a congregation. This may be due to the previous dispersion of believers from Jerusalem during the third persecution back in chapter 8, verse 4. No doubt some of them came to Lydda. However, others may have become believers as a result of Philip's ministry through the same territory back in chapter 8, verse 40. Verses 33 and 34 record the healing of Aeneas. And verse 33 introduces him as a certain man named Aeneas, who kept his bed for 8 years, for he was palsied. Aeneas was already a believer. He had been bedridden for 8 years because he was paralyzed. In verse 34 records the healing. Peter said to Aeneas, Yeshua the Messiah heals you. Arise, make your bed. The source of the healing was the Messiah. The tense of the Greek verb for heals, iatai, is the present middle indicative. It means Yeshua heals you here and now. Because there would be an immediate healing, Aeneas could arise and make his bed. Literally, the Greek states, "Spread your bed for yourself." The implication of the Greek is that others had been making his bed for him for 8 years, but now he was going to do it all for himself, all alone. This will be the evidence of the healing. There is instantaneous proof that a miracle took place, for straightway he arose, showing that he was healed instantaneously. According to verse 35, all that dwell at Lydda and in the plain of Sharon saw him, and they turned to the Lord. This phrase, all that dwelt, means all the Jews, because Peter had not yet used the keys of the kingdom to open the door to Gentiles. At this point in history, the majority of the population along the coastal plain was Gentile, not Jewish, not Hebrew-speaking, not Aramaic-speaking, but Greek-speaking. Now the minority of this population, the Jews, turned to the Lord. We now come to the next section of the ministry of Peter in Joppa or Joppa. This is chapter 9, verses 36 to 43. And in verse 36, he specifies where this occurs. Joppa, Joppa, other ways of pronouncing the name. The town is located 10 miles northwest of Lydda. In Hebrew, it's called Joppa. In modern English, Joppa. The verse introduces a certain disciple named Tabitha, which by interpretation is called Dorcas. Luke explained the name of Tabitha is the Aramaic word for gazelle, but the Greek word for gazelle is Dorcas. The word in Hebrew is tzibi. So Luke gave both her Aramaic or Jewish name, Tabitha, and her Greek name or Gentile name, Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and alms deeds, which she did.
The full length of this particular video presentation is 48 minutes. This brief sample should help to demonstrate the depth and quality of these teachings and recordings. There are 32 video lectures, over 20 hours of teaching content for this course on the Book of Acts. To order this or another online course, visit us at www.orielcollege.com.